our panel topic here is visualizing alternate worlds. So we are looking at how you describe your worlds, how you visualize them. If you do any kind of art form, how do you translate the ideas in your head into a visual medium or a verbal medium? What do you think is most important about that to remember when you do that?
Wow. Let me jump into that first because, God knows I am the least skilled person at actually producing video, or visual media on the planet. And I've been having, for the last 5 years, an extended flirtation with DAZ 3D and DAZ Studio. I was in an interesting situation where there was art for the Young Wizards works, at least on the covers, if nowhere else. There was no significant art for the Middle Kingdom stuff. And I looked at this and I thought to myself, look, these days the visual is everything. And if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to have to do it myself. Cue a 5-year learning curve on software, which is frankly less troublesome than you might expect. It has its quirks and its problems, but what it enables you to do is produce in very, very high quality, three-dimensional art, pretty much anything you can imagine. We are now dealing, at the software is free stage, with stuff that has been actively used by major film productions over the last decade.
Wow.
In particular, for example, Marvel has said quite happily that they've been using DAZ for storyboarding. Frankly, that's good enough for me. All I have to do is produce images of my characters that are good enough for people to look at and get a vague sense of what I'm seeing in my head. And there, with the visualization, comes the issue. How much of what you see of your characters in your head do your readers really need to see? It's easy to get caught up in the perfectionist end of things. It's easy to get caught up in the troubles, that are impinging on the software platform. Does not provide you with the kind of clothes your people would really wear. So, you flip a coin and you get as close as you can with what the platform will allow. There's still a lot there. And then you spend 5 years learning how to position the characters, how to handle lighting. Lighting is key beyond any possible way to express it. You can position a character correctly until the cows come home, but if the lighting surrounding them looks like crap, so will they. And it takes time. The people all around you working in the platform are learning just as you are. And so sometimes stuff looks great and sometimes not so much. Those who feel inclined to wander over to www.middlekingdoms.com and just go through the images there, you'll get a sense of how it works when it works and how it works when it doesn't. Some of the imagery, is right even when it's not as good as it could be. Some of the imagery is very polished, some of it not so much, but it's better than nothing.
It's better for when you're trying to get a message across to your readers.
Increasingly, in a world where marketing, let's use the horrible word, involves showing people rather than telling them. You have to have some decent art to show. And if no one else is going to do that, you get to do it. I will tell a little tale on myself, and I will say that in my fanfic, in other universes, I have occasionally hired other people because they were doing exactly what was needed to be done. And when you see that, you step away and you say, "Here, let me cross your palm with gold. Please do this thing for me." And that's there where it needs to be. The rest of the time, if you think you can manage it, well, you jump in there. There are some of us, pointing fingers, who are as gifted artists as they are writers.
I know which one you mean, and it's not me.
Yeah, well, you can tell where I'm pointing with this camera. I don't know, but some of us are really, really good at that, and plainly, the kindly Thoth has shed his grace on them, and that's terrific. The rest of us just sort of buggle along the best we can. Sorry.
Just then, so Ursula, then, as someone who does do some more of the visuals, as well as the writing, how do you combine the two?
The irony here is that I very rarely draw humans because I'm face blind. So while I have done lots of comics about talking animals, I never draw any of the characters from my fiction pretty much ever, and because they're sort of built of words in my brain. But I have learned that readers like a little more of a description of a character than he was 6 feet tall, had 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth in the usual places. Apparently that doesn't really work for a lead. So honestly, I do the laziest possible thing. I flip around on Google looking at models and celebrities, and I'm like, yeah, he looks kind of like I always pictured for this character. When I describe him, I will just stare at this photo and come up with some related adjectives. All right, good enough.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I generally don't then post the photo anywhere because that it's not my photo. People have their own rights to it, et cetera, et cetera. I am also, however, terrible at marketing. Diane is completely correct about showing people visuals. I get by on chicken pictures mostly. So my marketing skills are legendary in the negative sense. So I actually don't visualize most of my characters very much. The funny thing is, if I'm starting out doing a comic, I start with the visuals and I draw the character a few times before I write the script, because I know I have to draw the character and I have to sort of get that into my brain more or less. If I'm writing something where I know I'm not the illustrator, I can just say whatever. Generally, I have found that I like being the writer more than the illustrator because it's a lot less time consuming. Because as the writer, I can say the pitched final battle took place in a giant cathedral. And if I am the artist, I have to draw about 500 shots of the giant cathedral. And nobody's got time for that. So one of the sad facts is that many of my children's books that I had to illustrate, when I was sitting and thinking about what I had to draw, I'm like, maybe this could take place in a cave. Or nature is easy to draw. I also always, no one ever rides a bicycle in any of my comic books, nor will they ever, because bicycles are very hard to draw.
I've heard that.
Yes.
Would there be a lot of demand for that, do you think?
Honestly, if you're an illustrator or a comic artist, you fill your portfolio with cars, people, motorcycles, and horses, and architecture, buildings, and you will get a lot of hits. People, art directors like backgrounds and things like that.
God.
But that said, people have done lovely fan art, and I've been like, wow, yeah, that looks exactly like it was in my head. Well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of my books, Summer in Orcus, an illustrator, Trufke, she is what she goes by online, and did the interior illustrations, and like every time I would turn a page, I was like, this looks so much better than it did in my head. Wow, this is amazing. So and it's lovely when that happens.
Yeah. So Megan, how do you get stuff out of your head and onto paper? How do you feel like you're able to translate? Do you feel like you're able to translate what's in your head into words in a way that you feel like is satisfactory?
Yeah, well, when you put it that way, the answer is always no. I'm never satisfied that what I have on the page is as good as the thing that's in my head. I will say though that I don't really describe my characters very much. And that's mostly deliberate. As a reader, I found myself drawn to books, fantasy. Joan Aiken, especially was true. And then when I was in school, I'd have to do book reports. And the book reports I remember that I was doing in 5th and 6th grade, they asked specific questions about the books, like how old are the characters?
Oh God.
Right? And I'd go look at The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. They never mention how old any of these characters.
How would you know?
Exactly. I mean, it was every single book report was an exercise in frustration because none of the questions that were asked in the very generic book report were in the books how old they are, what they look like. So often, Aiken doesn't design filthy. Yeah. That's how she describes Dido Twite in Black Hearts and Battersea. Filthy. That's really not gonna make my 6th grade teacher happy.
If the author can't take any time, it's not your fault.
Exactly. And so I really wasn't reading myself for what the characters looked like. I was reading for what they were thinking, how they were feeling, the storyline. I didn't care what they looked like. And so as I'm writing, I'm much more interested in describing the insides of my characters than the outsides. And I think if you look at my books, that really shows that, and I started out that way because that was what I was more interested in. But as time went on, I found that it left a lot more room for my readers to decide for themselves what the characters look like. And I'm more than happy to give them that latitude. And the other thing is, I don't know if this is true for anybody else, but do you guys find that your characters look a lot of different ways before you have to settle down to writing them one way or another way? I swear my characters simultaneously have brown hair and blonde hair. Every scene actually takes place in 6 different ways as I'm imagining all of the different possibilities. But when it's time to actually write it down, you can only write it down one way. So I have to pick. And I get to that.
Collapse the waveform.
Exactly. I got to collapse the waveform. This person either going to be blonde or they're not going to be blonde. Make up your mind, Megan. But it does mean that sometimes I forgot how I made up my mind.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
That's why we have copy editors, though.
Exactly.
All the time.
Yeah, it's like this character's eyes have changed color 4 times in this book. I'm like, well, yeah, glad you caught that.
Man, I'm like,
Thank
that's
God
what I pay you for.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. It's interesting from the more software conceptualizing end of things that I find myself having to look at my characters and go, all right, you've been seeing her in this vague sort of way for 20, 30 years. Other people have been seeing her in this vague sort of way for 20, 30 years. And the cover artist has been seeing her in this vague sort of way for 20, 30 years, which changes every single time he does a book cover. God love him. And there comes a point when you're doing concept art for the people who theoretically are going to be coming any minute now to make a TV series out of your series. You've got to set it up and show them what you think you've been seeing in your head. And then it gets interesting because now you're in the vise, all right? Between what you see in here and between what the software can deliver. I have been in an argument with Nita Callahan's hair for 4 years. Okay? Because nobody on Daz has yet given me simple, straight, nearly shoulder length, brunette hair that might have gone in on a teenager, like 20 years ago, and might still possibly be on a teenager now. Nothing fancy, nothing styled, not wind blown. It's not all over the landscape. It just looks like your hair when you get up in the morning. Do any of the boys designing hair on Daz do that? Do they F? They design amazing wind blown, bizarre alien hair. And it's like, for God's sake, do none of you know a 14-year-old with hair, and I just want to strangle them, all of them.
Never seen hair before in their lives.
Really? Not from a normal woman, not from a normal girl, because they wouldn't look at any of those people, right? Because that would be they're either admitting something or admitting they didn't want to admit anything, which is another story entirely. It's very difficult sometimes to get the image in your head in this particular regard to be bent into a shape that will actually make sense to one of the, God help me, often clueless film and TV people who will be looking at your concept art. And I know those film and TV people because I have worked with them. I know exactly what they say when they see concept art that doesn't immediately grab them. And so you sit there and just clutch your head and go, ah! And you do that a lot.
Well, thanks. That's terrifying.
It's just, unfortunately, they've been trained by the film industry as a whole in terms of what you expect to see in concept art. And if they don't see it there, they go, nah, not for us. And somebody who has only graphic arts credentials is likely to cause a major studio to pass on your work simply because the art doesn't look right. Nothing to do with the conceptual virtues of it, nothing to do with what your characters are actually doing or experiencing. They will pass entirely on the art. And it could make you nuts. It really could. I've had as many near misses as anyone else. The Young Wizard stuff gets optioned on the average once a year or once every couple of years. Nothing new there. And this is why I'm now getting a website ready where I know the concept art at least will not be at fault, because we've had a couple times when it was, and I will not have that happen again. If this is yet another example of if you want anything done right, you got to do it yourself. I'm willing to spend, 3 or 6 months of my life on getting this right. If nothing else, when I drop dead, people can see what I saw.
Yeah.
And if we're lucky, Netflix might descend, or, Amazon or somebody else, and that. But it's tough because at the end of the day, it's not really what counts. It's what you said. It's what's going on in their heads.
Can I ask you a question? Say Netflix did descend.
Mm-hmm.
And they produce characters that don't look like what you had in your head. Now, not that they're completely different in age. I mean, there's always Percy Jackson, where I think everybody was what, 4 or 6 years older. Not something that dramatic. Say, but still, there's Nita with long hair.
Yeah.
And maybe she's tall, significantly tall, instead of I never thought of her as tall. So anyway, imagine
I hear you.
It doesn't look like you're imagining at all. Would that upset you?
It depends on where they're going with it. See, here's the thing. Any of us, without warning, can be Ursula Le Guin in this regard. She was set up with a perfect production team, with people who knew what her characters looked like. And suddenly, when the production changed hands, her original production team was thrown over the gunnel.
Under a bus.
Yeah. And suddenly, Ged was whitewashed. And suddenly, many other things happened that were not on the table. Now, here's maybe a tiny difference. And this is the only advantage I will ever have over Ursula Le Guin until the day I die. I'm a film person. I have 30 years of screen credential behind me. No one has any excuse to exclude me from a film or television production of work based in the Young Wizards universe. Therefore, the deals that Ursula signed with her co-production partners are not deals that I or my agent would ever be involved in. Because if there's one thing they're going to have to deal with when I sell, quote unquote, out to Netflix or Amazon, is they're going to have me in the bucket with them. I will not be standing off on the sidelines. I'm someone who's been involved in series and miniseries production. If I have to get a note from my co-production partners saying what a good partner I am, I'll get that. But what they need to know is I'm not going to allow them to screw my characters up. And that's just what they're going to have to deal with. When the day I sign on that line, it will be signing on a line that includes my executive producer credential.
Right.
They are going to pay me a ton of money for me to ideally give them an easy ride. And it's easy for them to give me an easy ride. I will be happy to work with them. If her hair is a bit longer, it's cool.
Right.
As long as we can all be clear about who knows the characters best. With deep regret, there are a lot of people who think Nita is Hispanic. She's not. It's nothing to do with her name. She's named after an old friend who was named Juanita in a time when lots of people were being named Juanita, whether or not they were Hispanic.
Right.
And that said, once we move past that, if anybody tries to screw with Kit, I will punch them into the wall. Because Kit is Latinx, and there he is. I grew up with Puerto Rican people. If anybody tries to whitewash Kit, I will destroy them. In a very tidy and
There you go. You got some response from the audience there, agreeing with you.
Yeah, it's just my characters get to be who they are. Daryl McAllister is Black, and that's the way it is. Anybody messes with Daryl, I wouldn't mess with Daryl if I were them. And so on down the line. Who they are is who they are. Characters' ethnicities need to be supported. And, beyond that, by and large, what needs to be true is what's going on in their heads. That's the heart of it. But representation matters too. So I'm aware. And anybody who thinks I'm not, and anybody who thinks giving me a whole lot of money is going to make me go away, maybe not.
All right. So another question then that we've had here is, what are some sources of inspiration that you've had for your books and how you're visualizing the world that you create? Anything from genres or time periods or environments to specific, like you mentioned, actors or pieces of media or anything that you've drawn from to kind of inspire these alternate worlds, these alternate places that you're creating in your head. And let's start with Megan. Let's start on the other side and start with Megan, and then Ursula, and then Diane, in reverse order from, at least on my screen, from how it was before.
So down to write, it was the first novel. I'd written a book of short stories, but it was the first time I'd written a novel. Until I knew where the book was going to be set. You know, the name of this panel, Visualizing Worlds. I was literally struggling to visualize the world in which it would be set. And the one thing I really knew for sure was that I didn't want it to look like Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Was tricky because every place I'd ever lived growing up, Earth.
Oh, God.
It was incredibly convenient as a 10-year-old to be able to walk outside and imagine that the mountains were Mordor and the forests were the Mirkwood, and that was great. And then I was an adult trying to write her first novel and thinking,
what else is there?
Not Middle Earth, not Middle Earth. But I also didn't want it to be so unfamiliar that I had to spend 800 pages describing it for my reader. And I was caught between the desire for something that was simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar. And I went to Greece for the first time in 1982. Yeah, and I looked at Greece and I thought, everybody knows what Greece looks like. And no one would mistake it for Middle Earth. Yeah. So that was, I realized, where I could set my story and not end up writing like the 800-page book in order to describe it all. I could just give my readers cues and they could visualize the world for themselves based on the cues that I was giving them. So in terms of the world, the trip to Greece was probably the single greatest inspiration of my entire life. In terms of books, I was just doing an interview for a podcast, and we talked about, you know, books that you read for either research or inspiration. So I happen to have them behind me. Here's an exciting one.
Ooh,
Greece.
Yeah, it you can see this big, and it makes it to 322 BC. Right?
Wow.
They didn't even get to, you know, the Christian era. And another favorite.
Ooh.
Ancient Near Eastern texts, which is Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but also the hieroglyphs from the pyramids. And the most wonderful thing about those texts are that you're reading something that's literally 3,000 years old.
Yeah.
And it's a guy trying to tell his kid that he needs to get up earlier in the morning if he's going to get anything done. And you're like, wow, some things never change, do they? So yeah, those. When I read Greece to 322 BC, I'm not really reading it for direct inspiration. My story's not set in ancient Greece; it's a more Byzantine era. And I read through ancient Near Eastern texts, and I don't think I have a single case of a dad nagging his son to get out of bed in the morning. But it's something about the tone of these things that wraps itself around my head and then helps me write. So a lot of my inspirations are visual. One of the reasons I love Tumblr is it just shows me pretty pictures.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I just get to look at pretty picture after pretty picture. One of the downsides of this is that when it comes time to do cover art, your editor contacts you and says, so that thing you described in the book, do you have a picture of that?
Oh God.
You're like, maybe? I mean, I it's based on something I saw somebody wearing in 2014 in a fashion shoot, I think, maybe. And then, 2.5 hours later of clicking through a million websites where you think maybe possibly you saw it, either you find it and you put it on the Pinterest board and point your editor towards it, or you're like, no, sorry, turns out I can't find it.
It's on Tumblr.
Yeah. And right.
And you know how well Tumblr's search function works.
Too well.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I
Megan,
think visual inspiration is really important to me.
Yeah. Megan, do you know a book called Fish Cakes and Courtesans? I invite you to seek it out. It is food culture in ancient Greece.
Oh.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you the author's name. It's fallen out of my head at the moment. Fish Cakes and Courtesans.
I was actually thinking of making a collaborative Storygraph or Goodreads list. And so I will try to look up these titles, and add them to a list.
I'm going to figure out
of all of the books that we're going to mention over the course of the week.
Sure. Yeah.
And so if folks have other things that have come up that they want to see added to that, message me about it as well. But yeah.
Oh, is it my turn?
Yes,
Ursula, what do you think?
Well, I'll be honest. The sort of ongoing world I've been writing in lately is pretty well vague fantasy European. I am resigned to that fact. I like cities. Like I will steal cities more or less outright. So Venice is always great for that. One of the more recent ones, the final act basically takes place in evil Venice. And I spend a lot of time, going, all right, how does evil Venice work in a fantasy world? Okay. And often that'll lead to more things. Like as I was ruminating on evil Venice, I started thinking about how the power basically of a lot of Venice came from control of the salt trade, and they had a great coastline for salt, and if you were one of the little villages that was harvesting salt from brine and whatnot, you could sell it to Venice, or Venice could come and destroy you, and those were your two options. So most people sold their salt to Venice, which meant they held a monopoly. Mm-hmm. And most of this I think I got from reading probably Salt, which is the book is just called Salt. It's a fabulous book. You should absolutely read it. And so
Emma writes that one down. Thank you, Emma.
I've got it.
Yeah.
And I should add that only that's the writer thing. You'll read 3 books in order to write 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. That most of the people probably won't notice or remember, but yes, I knew how the salt trade worked. And then, which actually led to the plot setup for an upcoming book where some clever bastard invents a magical desalinator and everything.
Now we're on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I thought I was like, I've never seen this done. Magical desalinization would upset all the trade throughout any quasi-medieval thing.
It's overdue, I'd say.
Yes, well, I'm trying to, I'm writing as fast as I can.
I was just going to say, write faster, write faster.
Another city was basically sort of New Orleans with artificers and golems and things. And it's not like, and in that case, it was basically, I just liked the architecture of the French Quarter. So that's what I wrote into it. But in terms of world building, and it's not so much visualization, because weirdly enough, I'm not that visual a person. You'd think I would be, but honestly, all of the secret of my success as an artist comes from I don't picture things in my head, so I can be satisfied with what I draw very easily, because I'm not trying to match the thing in my head. I can look at it and go, yeah, good enough. Which, if you're going to write an 800-page comic, believe me, that is a useful skill to have.
That is a gift.
Yes. So I tend to read about things that I find interesting, and then I'm like, God, I got to put this in a book. Mm-hmm. So and it could be anything. The first of the sort of Paladin romance novels I did was I was reading about the history of cosmetics and how perfumes, people who made perfumes were linked to poisoners because nobody knew how poison worked in those days. So, when you were there doing weird alchemical things and doubles distilling things, and the primary uses of perfume were usually to cover up terrible scents in leather making. And so then everybody started accusing the Medicis of killing people through poisoning their gloves.
Yeah.
Because the gloves had to be heavily scented. And so then the poisoners and the perfumers got sort of inextricably linked. And I'm like, all right, if I make the heroine a perfumer, then when she gets accused of being a poisoner, it'll all follow logically. And
everyone says, well, we knew that. And
the downside to that is that basically, whenever I find a really fascinating topic, I'm like, I got to base a book around this. And it is only a matter of time before I write a book based on sewage, because sewer systems are one of the most fascinating things. And particularly, ancient sewer systems are incredible.
Can I pause you there and say, I'm getting ready to start a 5-part series in which one of the 5 heroes is the guy who shovels shit for his living.
Oh, he's a night soil collector.
Yes, he's actually a civic. He's a contractor, and people's, shit vaults, let's just call them what they are, need to be cleaned out at a certain time in a certain way. I found out way more than I needed to know about this art. And it's quite funny. I get these notes. I think most of us do from, which web platform is it that stores learned articles about stuff?
Pocket?
Not Pocket, but no, it begins with an A. Don't help me. Well, I'll find it later. But anyway, do you know, says the email to me, this last one that came in the other day, that since you ran your search, 8,000 new articles about shit have been posted to the platform going,
oh, you want to forward all of those to Ursula?
Probably, yeah.
But this poor guy, it's his job. He's been doing his job. And then he suddenly finds out, and I'm supposed to save the world as well as shoveling shit. Did I sign up for this? I look forward. The series started as a joke on Tumblr. Someone said to me, how do fonts express the content of a work? And I said, all right, fine. I put up several different versions of a title for a book in varying different fonts. And the minute I put one up, this is another form of visualization, I suppose. I put it up in the long, lean Roman font that has become very much de rigueur for fantasy works. And it said, the thumb of Zorbo. And I went, wait a minute. And I instantly saw the guy and I went, oh, I'm doomed now. I am so
bunnies.
Yeah, well, we've got 5 of them, right? no, this is not the place to go off on that. But anyway, suddenly I have another series of short novels to write. I really was not planning on that this year. I've got 2 more novels already due before the end of September. And it's like,
That's how they get you.
Yeah.
The novels, they lie in wait.
These guys. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say the book I would recommend to read, Sewage, before I forget, is called Flushed: How the Plumber Saved Civilization.
Yes, I have that. Thank God.
And it's been said with remarkable accuracy that the primary function of civilization is determining how to keep sewage out of your fresh water.
Yeah.
And everything else basically derives from that.
Everything rises and falls on that. The year that London almost stopped being a capital city of Europe because shit got out of hand. There's no other way to describe it. It's and that within a long throw of the here and now. We're talking about the mid 1800s. This is not ancient history. How quickly something so basic can take a world apart.
Suddenly I'm counting my lucky stars for my sources of inspiration. Greece, beautiful blue skies, dark seas. Although
I will point out that
I'd love to read the book.
I have occasionally lost water because I'm on a well. So if we lose power, we lose water. And whenever we have a major power outage and can no longer flush the toilets, I begin to think about how plumbing is one of
vitally important.
Yeah,
and
for us.
Yeah. Also, whenever I have done some travel in areas that were fond of squat toilets and did not have plumbing. Yes, the Himalayas being the primary one. And man, the first day that I went to we got to a hotel that had a Western style toilet, I fell to my knees and embraced it. It was a joy.
You learn what you take for granted. The first time we went to Greece, we had I was the speaker at a conference of the Society of I've lost it. Writers and Illustrators for Young Adults. Okay, I've lost their proper acronym.
SCBWI.
Thank you very much. And the conference that year was on Hydra, the island of Hydra in off Athens. Off we went, and suddenly you learn that toilets are not what you thought they were, and that
your idea of a toilet is not universal.
Not at all, not a bit. And suddenly it's all brought into you, along with many other fabulous cultural things that you would never have seen before if you weren't plunged into that. But you learn quickly that what your culture, what your home culture takes for granted about something is not necessarily going to be what your character's culture takes for granted about it. And you start adjusting your take on your own universes to bear in mind places where like Flushing is a luxury, or it's not that it hasn't been invented yet, especially in a universe where there are magic users. But the question is, who do you know who wants to spend a few weeks of their life's span on making sure that your plumbing works correctly? Maybe gravity is cheaper, and you start doing the math in your head, and as your characters have been doing it for a while now. What you take for granted is not the way it's going to be on another planet. And let's, just not even get into atmospheres and, oh, please. Yesterday, someone said, what does it look like on a planet where it rains diamonds? And I sort of went, and fled away into a corner to clutch my head.
Well, your eyeballs would melt from the heat, so you don't have to worry about it.
Well, really, but, out, on Neptune, theoretically it does that. And someone comes along to you, if this is in your department, and God help me, it's in mine, and says, "What's that look like?" And you go, "Oh dear." and you're left trying for a long time to try to find a way to visualize that for other human beings who will probably, many of them, read it and forget it 20 minutes later.
I was just going to say, this is why I'm glad I work in a medium where I don't have to do that. I can just say, "Hey, raining diamonds.
It's raining
Totally
diamonds.
awesome. Moving on to the next plot point. We will now see something else entirely." Yeah.
And since I tend to write fairly dark, mine would be, "It was raining diamonds. There were no survivors."
Yeah, see, there we go.
There you go. One last.
I mean, I've been out in a hailstorm, and that was bad. But
one last question to wrap up an audience submitted question is how do you create aliens or fantasy species that think and act significantly different from humans without falling back on stereotypes?
I would like to hear Ursula answer this one because she has the most wonderful wombat. And one of the things I loved about Digger was the not human fixations that your main character would sometimes have, and the not human understanding of certain events, like bad air. And wombats don't do things like that, and that sort of thing. How did you make a wombat?
Just quickly, the question is from Jamie or at the Mind Stream, just as a credit, and then yes, go ahead.
Oh God, it was so long ago. If I had some kind of amazing meditative technique, I've forgotten. But I just tried to think about. A lot of it was easy. I figure any burrowing species would sort of act like that. Much like Pratchett's dwarves, they care a lot about bad air, about the stability of mine shafts, and being that they were a completely non-magical species, an aggressively non-magical species, they cared about engineering and extra support structures and checking your math when explosives were involved, and they were very sort of meticulous engineers in that regard, and they liked digging. So their idea of a good time was digging a root cellar. It was like, oh yay, I get to dig stuff. I just kind of did that and ran with it. I think to a certain extent you have to make your non-human races alien enough to sort of give an impression of alienness, but comprehensible enough that they're fun for a reader. Like, it would be entirely possible, I imagine, to write a story with deeply alien jellyfish creatures or something, or to conceive of a race of jellyfish that are, so, and I picked jellyfish at random, but whatever, that are so alien that they have nothing to say to humans and humans have very little to say to them. And however accurate that might be as a, alien, it's also just not much fun to read. So you have to kind of do this balancing act where everyone isn't a human in an alien suit, but they are still recognizable enough that they work in the story. Watership Down, I felt, was a fabulous example of this because all the rabbits, I mean, they're humans in rabbit suits to a certain extent, but they don't feel like it as much as a lot of other things. Their politics, for lack of a better term, are based on what rabbits would worry about, kind of thing. There's a. I think it's a balancing act, and sometimes you do it well, and sometimes later you come back and go, "Wow, I've recreated Vulcans! Yay me!"
I've reinvented hobbits. Look.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I went the cheap and easy way. I read C.J. Cherry.
Talk about good aliens.
Yeah. Excellent
Yes.
aliens.
Carolyn has the art of the alien, the just alien enough alien down to a fine art.
I am so sad there is not a third book in the Clouds Rider series.
Oh, really? And that said,
give me another one.
Channer's pretty fair. You know,
Oh, yeah.
the Channer books in particular, because she throws you a bone. She not only gives you a species based on lions, but she then gives you a poor, lost, confused human guy who looks an awful lot like Mike Whalen, to, for you to live in his head and learn to experience this fabulous alien species, who interact in their turn with other fabulous alien species who even, the honey look at them and go, oh, who wants to deal with them? They're just too weird. And when the lionesses are going, nah, too strange, then you are smack in the middle of one of the most perfect, alien species, space operas, if we really want to call it that. It's more than that. That you could imagine. What I know about writing aliens, Carolyn taught me. And people tell me I don't do too bad in aliens. So, that's
a great job.
Well, it's very kind. And half the job is being in their heads. That's the other thing she taught me. Mm-hmm. You've got to sit in their heads long enough to see what the world looks like to them. And then you go on from there. After that, you can rack it in and out of their points of view as you must to do your work. But at all times, remembering how weird it is, these carbon-based things with like flesh. You can't write a Horta until you've been stoned, ever so briefly. You have to sit there for a bit and feel it and see what that's like, to be the youngest kid of the Mother Horta who goes to space on a Starfleet vessel. Yeah. And suddenly other people are taking care of him and ordering him in some really nice granite. He hasn't had any decent granite all, for half this trip. Where you understand your character well enough that other people in the same universe start understanding them too. You have to sit in their head, wherever their head is, and just be there with them for long enough to understand what counts, and then splash out, get them in trouble. That's how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, Ursula, about making aliens so incomprehensible that you can't really write a fun story anymore.
That's when it becomes cosmic horror. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think Cherry would be like, hold my beer. I'm going to write another Foreigner.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like it's a spectrum between, like sort of an uncanny valley spectrum, maybe, where you have the really close things like Vulcans, and then the other end is Cthulhu, or fungi from Yuggoth or whatever, and you kind of, there's the spectrum of alienness from the comprehensible to the barely comprehensible to the doesn't want to comprehend us
to the totally terrifying. Yeah.
It's so alien that now its sheer alienness is alarming, which is also hard to write. I mean, it's hard to come up with something that is terrifyingly alien that is genuinely terrifying. It's because
we're always going to be experiencing it from our human perspective.
Right. So, and since if the problem is that the thing is so alien that it's scary, to a human, you're like sitting here going, oh God, okay, what is scary that is not, just big teeth, then
There has to be a place where you can at least bump elbows.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Where you can acknowledge that you are part of the same economy or part of the same structure without being at all particularly understandable to one another. There is a place in either some of the Young Wizards meta material or in one of the actual books where Tom Swale says to one or another of the kids, look, these people's oaths look nothing like ours. They do not understand the business of being human anything like the way we understand it. But we are fighting on the same side. They are our cousins, even if we can't figure out what the hell they're going on about half the time, or 3/4 or 90% of the time. We have some common ground. Your business, if it comes into the story that deeply, is to illustrate what that common ground is. And it doesn't have to be any more than the elbow bump. Literally, I'm clear about that. That point where another species' definition of humanity touches base with yours ever so briefly. That's enough. If we're, what I know about the Young Wizards material is that at a certain level, it has a kinship with the Green Lantern Corps, and the sense that all of us are fighting this same fight, even though we fight it in many very, very different ways. Mm-hmm. That's what you have to illustrate. It's tough when the other side of the discussion is so far from human that you can barely describe it. Your job then is to find the one place where your elbows bump and emphasize that. And when everybody walks away from that story, they'll be, yeah, that was fine. We got that. Yeah. It's not easy.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for all of your wonderful input and this fantastic discussion. It was so lovely to talk with all of you.
Thank you for jumping in to moderate at the last minute.
Technologically as well.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Mm-hmm. And our next event will take place in half an hour in this same space.